He was always the youngest in the room. At first, it made people smile, teachers, neighbors, family members. "Look at how smart he is," they'd say, clapping at the fact that he could read early or code simple animations on an old laptop. But as he got older, the compliments turned to suspicion. The same people who once praised his pace started warning him about burnout and humility. They said success too early would come at a cost. They said experience mattered more than insight. He kept moving anyway. At 13, while his friends played games, he was designing one. Not for fun, for testing logic. At 15, he didn't attend parties. He built tools for creators who didn't know how to code. At 16, he launched a small startup from his bedroom, just him, an open-source framework, and a community of people online who had no idea how old he was. He never told them. He didn't need to. Because on the internet, no one cares about your age when your solution works. By the time he turned 18, he had already failed twice. Not in theory, in practice. Full products launched, marketed, lived, and died. He learned how to read customer behavior, how to listen to bugs, how to write documentation that people could actually use. When others his age were preparing for their first internships, he had already hired his first part-time engineer. But still, when he entered real rooms, age returned. He walked into startup meetups wearing a hoodie and a badge that still said student. The first thing people always asked wasn't what he built, it was what grade he was in. They laughed when he said CEO. They nodded politely when he described his platform. They said things like, "Impressive for your age," which always meant, "We don't take you seriously yet." He stayed quiet. Not because he lacked the words. Because he understood something they didn't. The best revenge is proof. And proof takes time. He watched as the very people who dismissed him raised money on slides filled with fluff. He watched them build teams around vanity. He watched their products overpromise and crash on launch day. And he said nothing. He just kept building. He joined accelerator programs. Not to be mentored, to study. He listened to how they made decisions, watched how they tracked data, read every rejected deck they said was not ready. And he took notes. By 20, he was ready. He'd built a tool that solved a real problem, one that large companies had been ignoring because the margins were too thin. But the volume was there. And he knew how to scale. So he did. Users came fast. Then faster. Revenue grew. Then it doubled. He didn't hire loudly. He didn't raise capital yet. He reinvested. Taught himself what it meant to turn profit before turning heads. Then, when he was finally ready, truly ready, he walked into the office of the company where he had once interned and been told to go get some experience. He carried a folder. Nothing flashy. Just numbers. Data. Proven traction. And an offer. Not for a job. For acquisition. They didn't recognize him at first. Then they asked his age. And when he told them, they smiled nervously this time. Because now, the boy they had once dismissed wasn't looking for a seat at their table. He was offering to buy the whole building. They stalled. They said they needed time to review. To analyze the terms, verify the metrics, run their due diligence. But the truth was simpler, they were stunned. Not by the numbers. By the face that brought them. He sat at the end of the long boardroom table, calm, quiet, waiting. The same room where he'd once fetched coffee, scribbled ideas in silence, been told to shadow rather than lead. Now, his signature on a line would determine their future. And they didn't know how to react. Behind closed doors, they argued. Not about the deal, about him. He's 21. Where's his team? Is there a grown-up behind this? Someone even suggested it was a front. That surely there was a hidden investor, a ghost CEO, a puppeteer with a pedigree. They couldn't process the idea that a product this strong, this stable, this scalable had come from someone who hadn't yet aged out of student discounts. They made calls. Whispers reached investors. Emails circulated, quiet inquiries dressed as curiosity. But everywhere they looked, the result was the same. No red flags. No scams. No tricks. Just execution. Perfect, patient execution. And still, they didn't want to believe. Because belief would mean questioning their own filters. Their own decades of decisions based on polish instead of performance. He knew what they were thinking. He could read it in their body language. But he didn't flinch. He had dealt with that look before. He'd heard "too young" so many times it had become background noise. Instead, he focused on the numbers. The overlap in customer base. The inefficiencies in their onboarding pipeline. The tech debt they'd accrued from chasing growth over structure. He outlined how his system could replace 3 of their outdated processes overnight. They nodded. Quietly. Still hesitant. He didn't push. Because leverage doesn't beg. He left the room after 28 minutes. No hard sell. No pitch theater. Just facts, clarity, and time. Outside, his phone buzzed. A notification from his dashboard: user growth up 6% that morning. He smiled. The clock was ticking. Inside, the board had another meeting. One that started not with strategy, but with fear. They had built a brand, but he had built a machine. And if they didn't accept his offer, they knew exactly what would happen next. He'd outbuild them, outrun them, outrice them. And then they'd be negotiating not with him, but with the people he hired to replace them. He didn't wait for their answer. Not out of arrogance, out of certainty. He knew how this would play out. He'd seen it before. When legacy companies blinked too long while builders were already moving forward. The deal on the table wasn't a plea. It was a warning shot dressed as an opportunity. He returned to his own office, small, sharp, quiet. No polished glass. No receptionist. Just a core team that moved like blood through a fast-beating heart. He sat at his desk, kicked off his shoes, opened his laptop, and began writing the migration guide. Not in case the deal went through, in case it didn't. Because whether they accepted or not, the future was already moving. He was already replacing their core value props with smoother, simpler, more scalable tools. Tools he had built himself. He didn't use frameworks bloated with features he didn't need. He wrote his own base. His product didn't need a pitch deck. It needed only friction. And friction was everywhere. Every inefficiency in their onboarding. Every delay in their customer support logic. Every crash that didn't make it into their press statements. He didn't have a comms team to spin it. He had screenshots, users, and uptime numbers that spoke for themselves. His team worked in silence but not secrecy. Everything they did was documented, refined, and shipped. No meetings about meetings. No titles that meant nothing. Just function. That week, a client they'd been targeting for 6 months called his personal phone. They'd been using the other company for years. Now they wanted to migrate. He didn't gloat. He just opened the admin panel and triggered the account setup. 30 minutes later, the client was on board, live, and already seeing faster performance. The call ended with 5 words. "We should have called you earlier." He didn't respond. He just muted his mic, looked around the room, and said, "We're getting closer." The numbers followed. 2 more clients moved over. Then 4. Then 7. The acquisition target began losing revenue in real time. They didn't issue a press release. They couldn't. To admit loss would admit miscalculation. Internally, their team began panicking. Customer success was flooded with requests. Engineering flagged anomalies they couldn't trace. And someone finally said it. "This kid is eating us alive." But he wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about the hundreds of users still stuck in an outdated system, waiting for something better and not even knowing it was already here. He didn't want to beat them. He wanted to make them irrelevant. And every minute they delayed, they got closer to becoming exactly that. The 4th month marked the turning point. Not in headlines, those always came too late, but in movement, in silence, in a subtle shift of attention. Clients who once took pride in being long-term loyalists to legacy firms were now quietly reaching out to him through back channels. CTOs of established companies requested technical walkthroughs that turned into strategy sessions. Product managers from competitors began following his every move online. They weren't watching out of curiosity anymore. They were watching because they knew. Something faster, cheaper, smarter had arrived, and it didn't care how old the person behind it was. Inside the company he once tried to acquire, cracks began to show. The board pushed for answers. The execs blamed market volatility. They suggested repositioning. They argued over design tweaks and messaging tone, completely missing the fact that the market had already shifted around them. They tried launching a new product, crashed on the first day. Meanwhile, he didn't launch a thing that week. He fixed a tiny bug that improved data load times by 0.4 seconds. The users noticed, and that was all he needed. He didn't advertise. He didn't chase press. He let performance speak. And performance never stutters. One day, he walked into a client office he'd never been allowed to pitch before. This time, they invited him. No security badge delays. No waiting in the lobby. Straight into the boardroom. The head of engineering stood up when he entered. They offered him water. He declined. They asked how long it would take to onboard their entire team. He looked at the whiteboard, read their process map, and said, 17 days. They laughed, then stopped when he explained how. No theatrics, no promises, just facts. He left with a signed agreement. 2 hours later, their lead dev texted him, "Your team moves like an army." He replied, "No, we move like we're not waiting for permission." That night, he sent an internal message to his team. "No more chasing. From here on, we build what they can't ignore." They understood what that meant. It wasn't war. It was inevitability. The old company called him the next morning. The voice was different. No arrogance. No stall tactics. Just one question. "Is your offer still open?" He didn't smile. He didn't pause. He said, "It changed," and emailed the new terms: leaner, tighter, colder. Because the longer they waited, the more expensive his silence became. The revised offer didn't include negotiation. It didn't come with a polished deck or handshakes. It was a single PDF file. Bullet points, dates, conditions, expiration. It was lean, clinical, undeniable. Not a pitch, a decision. And they understood the message. The boy they once told to gain experience now held the clock, and time was bleeding them dry. They met internally for hours. Whispers in executive offices. Slack threads full of red warnings. Boardroom meetings that circled around the one question no one wanted to ask out loud. How did we miss this? But deep down, they knew. They hadn't missed it. They'd ignored it, dismissed it, laughed at it, and now they were paying for it. He didn't wait for a reply. He doubled down on product development. He rolled out a support automation system that reduced client churn by 30% in a week. He launched an onboarding wizard that cut integration time in half. His analytics platform hit 99.97% accuracy across all dashboards. His users weren't just growing. They were becoming evangelists. They posted their results. They bragged about switching. They recommended him not because they were told to, but because they had never seen anything move like this. And behind every improvement, behind every change, was him. Not a ghost team. Not a bloated org chart. Just one kid who built better because he listened harder. And because he had been ignored for so long, he knew exactly where value was hiding. Then came the call. A different number. Private. He answered. It was the chair of the board. Older voice. Measured. Direct. "We've accepted the new terms." He said nothing. Just waited. The voice continued. "You'll need to submit your transition roadmap to our legal team by end of week." He replied, "It's already done." There was a pause. Then, softer. "You built something real." He nodded, unseen. "I tried to show you that 3 years ago." And just like that, it was finished. No champagne. No headlines. No victory lap. Just an email sent, a transfer confirmed, and a company absorbed by someone they never thought they'd answer to. He didn't announce it. He didn't even post about it. Because that wasn't the win. The win was every young builder watching this unfold in silence, realizing they didn't have to wait anymore. That experience is earned through action, not years. And that being underestimated was no longer a weakness. It was leverage. He didn't move into the old company's headquarters. He had no interest in sitting in a chair that once overlooked him. He let the building stand quiet, polished, empty of meaning. He kept his team where it had always been, close, fast, lean. He integrated what was useful. He released what wasn't. He onboarded their best talent, not based on resumes, but on responsiveness. Those who had once overlooked him were invited to contribute if they still had the courage to listen. The news leaked eventually, not because he told anyone, because someone recognized his signature on the restructuring documents. Headlines followed. Acquired by a 21-year-old founder. Too young to lead? Think again. From rejection to ownership. He didn't comment. His team kept working. More clients arrived. His system scaled without stress. His numbers tripled. But beyond all of that, something more important happened. He began to hear a different kind of story. From strangers. From kids. From people who once thought ambition had an age limit. They messaged him online. They emailed support addresses, hoping to reach him. They said things like, "I've been told I'm too young for this role. I built something but no one listens. I don't know how to keep believing in myself." He replied to all of them. Not with advice, with permission. Because no one had given it to him. And he knew how dangerous silence could be. He started an initiative quietly. Grants for teenage founders. Mentorship for those rejected by traditional pathways. Hackathons judged by product, not pitch polish. And as more stories emerged, the myth that youth meant weakness began to unravel. Because people were finally watching not who was loudest, but who was building. One afternoon, he sat down in the same cafe where he'd drafted his first roadmap. The same cracked table. The same half-broken outlet he'd used to charge his laptop during all-night builds. He opened a message from an investor who had once turned him away. It read, "We'd love to talk. Big fan of what you've built." He smiled, deleted the message, took a sip of cold coffee, and kept working. Because the goal had never been to prove them wrong. It was to prove others like him right. And now every room he walked into was filled with possibility. Not because he looked older, but because he never waited for permission to matter.